Hello, my lifelong fitness clan. How the heck are you? I hope you are treating life well. And I certainly hope that it is returning the favor to you. I'm excited for this presentation because what seems like a very simple topic, the importance of fruits and vegetables, is actually a little more complicated than you think in the fact that this is also one of those common sense principles, but way off, way off of common practice. Here's a little interesting statistic for you, or factoid, shall we say. Back in the 18th century, the average American would consume anywhere from 5 to 8 servings of vegetables per day, and that equated to about anywhere from 50 to 100 grams of fiber. This was just typical. This is with farming and agriculture. This is just how we lived life. Now, the average American consumes under 15. Okay, and so this is just a perfect illustration that we as Americans are really missing the boat when it comes to this topic. And so as I go through this today with you, I want you to open your mind. I want you to be very open to change, because we have really been sold a lie. And that lie is what we've been taught from the time we were literally in grade school. I'm sure, looking at this little diagram, the food guide pyramid, that you are all familiar with this. Now, granted, this has changed. They've updated it for the better. I will give them that. But this is what we have learned, and what most Americans still understand and comprehend what a good diet, quote, should be. But if we're eating by the food guide pyramid, then, well, we're good. What I want to disprove today is the whole foundation of it. And I mean that in a very literal sense. If you look at this pyramid, I want to disprove the foundation of which you are looking at, the 6 to 11 grams or servings of grains, bread, cereal, and pasta. Okay? So it's time, my friends, to switch paradigms. It is time to step into the knowledge of the 21st century and to start to live according to what our body physiologically is asking for. And I can guarantee you it's not this. Grains, pasta, and cereal should not be your foundation. This is, quite interestingly, what has gotten us into the debacle that we are in right now. Because generally, we have followed this. And in reality, veggies and fruit should be the foundation, and especially vegetables. Okay? Fruit is kind of that should not be the foundation. Vegetables should be the foundation of your nutrition. Okay? Now, when I say vegetables, let me just preface this. I'm not talking about canned, boiled, stewed, packaged, dehydrated. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about raw, or at the very least, a lightly steamed vegetable. Okay, that's what we're talking about. So, I want to give you 6 to 11 reasons to avoid 6 to 11 servings. Hopefully your pantry doesn't look like that on the right there. Here's the first and foremost reasons. Most grains that we consume as Americans are refined. Now, what that means is that a whole grain has 3 parts. Okay? To make a whole grain, you've got 3 parts to the grain. You've got the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. Now, when you refine a grain, you take away typically the bran, which is the fibrous part of the grain. You also take away the germ, which has most of your nutrition housed within it, and you're left with the endosperm, which is the most nutritionally, I won't say bankrupt, but it has the lowest amount of nutrition in it. Okay? This is the refining process. Now, if you've ever seen the little connotate, not connotation, the little label on a bread or any kind of processed grain, it'll say enriched or fortified. Okay? And this is where, because they've taken things out, those two nutritional components, the fiber and the nutrition, they have to add back in some nutrition. Now, interestingly enough, they don't add the fiber back in. They just add synthetic, man-made, often toxic vitamins and minerals that are synthesized in a chemical laboratory. And if you think that sounds weird, I would invite you to do your own research. There's a lot of studies out there that are unbiased that will show that these synthesized vitamins and minerals are not readily absorbed into the body like the natural forms are. Okay, so something to think about and consider when you're considering food that is directly linked to your health and well-being. Here's another good reason. Most have a very high glycemic, and I have moderate on there. The truth be known, most processed foods that are refined grains, are very high on the glycemic index, which imbalances hormones. Because remember, when our last presentation, when you have high blood sugar, you have high insulin. Insulin is one of your three primary hormones. If you imbalance that, you're also going to imbalance cortisol, adrenaline. If you're female, you're going to imbalance progesterone, estrogen. If you're male, testosterone, human growth hormone. All of these hormones start to become imbalanced. Okay? Again, look at our nation right now. We are becoming overweight. Our obesity rate is rising. And largely and shockingly, we have followed the food guide pyramid, right? And this is the problem. Now, again, you might be saying, well, this food guide pyramid does specify refined, fats and oils, but it really doesn't specify too much on the refined grains. Now, when an average American says 6 to 11 servings of grains, they think something that's packaged up, a box of crackers, some pasta. Now, once you look at there, most Americans are eating white bread. Most Americans are having white pasta, ramen noodles, TV dinners. These are all refined forms of grains. Okay? So, with that in mind, we have to understand that literally up to 50% of us have sensitivities to grains. We're talking glucose intolerances. There's a lot of laboratory researchers that have found that a large amount of Americans have gluten sensitivities, and there is a large reservoir of reasons for that. We're not going to go into that. But if you look at unbiased research, not research conducted by the cereal companies and grain companies, of course they're going to give you research that says that Americans don't have gluten sensitivity, but the fact of reality is we do. I'm a level 3 holistic practitioner, and when I coach somebody on the holistic level, I often find that these food sensitivities can often be alleviated by taking out grains. It's plain and simple. Regardless of what you read on the internet, the fact of the matter is when we take these out, at least in their refined forms, skin starts to heal up, we start to lose weight more rapidly, our hormones start to come back into balance. There's a lot of benefits that come from these grains being taken out. Okay? Now, I think I've got another bullet point, but these can cause carb and sugar cravings. Why? Because they have a high glycemic index and it shoots your insulin up. And what goes up must come down. When it comes down, you want more carbohydrate. When your insulin comes down, your blood sugar comes down, it leads to cravings. It leads to irritability. It leads to hormone imbalances, and therefore you want to fix the problem, so you go back for some more. Okay? Now, all of this said, when we have been conditioned to believe that we should have 6 to 11 grams of grain, 6 to 11 servings of grains in cereals and so forth, the byproduct of that thinking is that we typically do not look at vegetables as that important. We tend to think of our mother nagging us, have your vegetables. We typically leave them to the wayside. Now, this is not where we want to be. If the majority of our nutrition If the majority of our nutrients, meaning vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, polyphenols, secondary nutrients, come from vegetables, which they do, which make your life more quality, then it would behoove us to increase our consumption of vegetables. So, look at our little pancake buddy here. Did you know that refined flour, when we take the whole grain and we grind it up, we take out all the nutrients, and we get a flour, it has 10,000 times the surface area as a whole grain. Now, in case you're wondering what that means, imagine if I took a big sack, like a fertilizer sack, and I put tennis balls in it. And I went to a tennis court and I dumped the tennis balls out. You'd probably get, maybe 100 tennis balls that would dot the court. Okay? A fair amount of tennis balls on that court. Now, imagine that I took refined flour, and each little kernel of flour, if there is such a thing, each little grain of flour would be analogous to a tennis ball. And I took that big sack and I spread it across the entire tennis court. What would you have? You'd have just that. You would have a tennis court that is completely covered in flour. Now, this is exactly what's happening in your intestinal tract and in your stomach. When it comes down into the intestinal tract, what you have is flour that coats it, and this is a problem because once it gets into the intestinal tract, it is absorbed as sugar, just like sugar. It raises blood sugar up instantaneously, and then your insulin goes up, and then you have the problem of the 3 containers that I elaborated on previously. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, when we're talking about flour or grains, just know that conventionally farmed grains come from depleted soils. Now, a lot of people think, oh, here we go, we're going to talk about depleted soils. I don't believe in that. I believe that our foods are just as good. If you do your research, again, I would invite you to look at unbiased sources. If you do your research, you will find that our soils do not contain the amount of vitamins and minerals and microorganisms which are responsible for the nutrition of the food that they produce. You will find that there is a dire consequence. There's actually a source that I would recommend. It's called Under the Veil of Deception by Paul Chek. He's the founder of the Chek Institute. That's the holistic school that I just graduated from. And what you'll find is that these conventionally farmed grains are coming from soils that literally have no nutrition. Now, if they have no nutrition, what does that mean for you? The old saying, you are what you eat, is absolutely true. So keep that in mind. Now, this being the case, if you keep throwing the flour on the tennis court, which is your intestinal tract, and we know that fungus feeds on sugar and feeds on flour and high glycemic substances without no fiber or natural foods, well, we are inviting fungal infections which cause a plethora of health ailments ranging from achy joints to mood swings to hormonal imbalances to impotence to sleep disturbances. You name it. There are a literal plethora of side effects, ailments, and yes, diseases that stem from fungal infections. So not where we want to be. Now, white flour, refined grains, are typically interlaced with sugar. And what I mean by that is where you have, let's take our pancake there, where you have a nice refined flour, you typically have sugar. What do you put on a pancake? Now, not only the consumer adding sugar, as in the pancake, but typically you're going to have the flour, and then there's high fructose corn syrup or sugar interlaced within the product itself. Now, this is a very unholy alliance. This is not where we want to be. Okay, so keep in mind that We need to become savvy to where and what and how often we are eating these kind of grains. And this is where the 80-20 rule really comes into play. Typically, when we eat these alone, without fiber, our blood sugar goes higher. And where you have processed foods and refined grains, you're going to have a high amount of blood sugar, which leads to high insulin, and you know the rest of the story. I hope this is opening your eyes. We as Americans don't really stop and think because we're in too much of a hurry. We have no time. It's mañana, baby. I'm not going to think about it right now. I just need to get something down my throat. I need something quick. We don't think about what we're doing. And again, this is a course of awareness. This is not to make you feel bad or feel guilty. Don't get me wrong. Please don't. Actually, congratulations, because you're becoming empowered to make better, more conscious decisions, which will serve you and your health. Let's look and continue the 6 to 11 reasons to consume, let's shift to 6 to 11 reasons to consume at least 6 veggies daily. Now, don't let that number scare you. I'll explain. I know most of you are not going to have 6 vegetables every day starting right now. We're going to talk about weaning, so don't worry. First and foremost, this relates and is dependent on your metabolic type. If you're more of a carbohydrate type, you naturally will need at least 4 to 6 servings of vegetables per day. If you're a protein type, the quantity can still go down, but I would say at the very least, at least 3. That's precedent. Say 4, you're probably going to be better off. Okay. So in general, eat 4 to 6 servings per day and intersperse them evenly throughout the day. Now, the reason that that's important is because when you intersperse your vegetables and your fruit throughout the day, what happens is it has a blood sugar mitigating effect. Okay, in other words, if you are eating starches, such as a potato, or if you do have some whole grains, which is fine, when you have vegetables with it, the vegetables serve to mitigate your blood sugar response. In other words, think of it this way. If I were to go down into your intestines right now and wrap them in saran wrap, how much nutrition are you going to be able to absorb? Now, vegetables have a similar effect, but in a good way, not in a toxic way like that. Vegetables, if you eat your vegetables before you have a grain, or even if you have a treat, let's say you had a salad before you had a bowl of ice cream with your family, living the 80-20 principle. What happens is the polysaccharide fibers, which are indigestible from the vegetables, go down into your intestinal tract, they line your intestinal lumen, and when they line the intestinal lumen, they essentially put this saran wrap around them so that you can not absorb as much sugar. Okay? So it has a blood sugar mitigating effect. Now, not to mention, it's going to load you with nutrition if you're interspersing them throughout the day. Now, another thing that a lot of clients that I coach will say is, well, Griff, I had a large salad. That's at least 3 servings. No, that's 1 serving. So whenever a serving is considered a setting. Okay, now obviously you might be thinking, well, yeah, but that's not what they say, that if you have so much celery, that's going to be 2 servings. Well, yeah, that's correct. But I look at this from a blood sugar perspective. The more you intersperse your vegetables throughout the day, the more you work fiber through your system efficiently and effectively. And second, the more you mitigate your blood sugar. And third, the more vitamins and minerals you start to intersperse throughout the day, which your body is more amenable for absorption. So there's 3 good reasons why you should intersperse them throughout the day. Now also remember variety and rotation. Don't get into the trap that I do this myself sometimes, but I have to keep myself aware. You want to have variety and you want to rotate your vegetables. Okay, this is very important. The reason for that is twofold. One, the more variety you have, the more nutrition you get, the more vitamins and minerals. A lot of people can even get vitamin deficiencies if they keep eating the same things day in and day out. They're usually acute and they don't feel it as much, but nonetheless they're there. They're not in optimal health. The second is immunity. When you eat the same foods each and every day, your immune system starts to view them as antigens. Okay, in other words, they start to look as foreign invaders because your body has to keep detoxifying and it activates an immune response. And this is not desirable because when you overactivate your immune system, you subsequently down regulate your energy levels. Okay, so remember to rotate and have your variety. I'd mentioned this before. Remember, steam to cook. Don't cook it out. Now, I know there's certain times where you're going to have soups, and you're going to throw vegetables and cook them, and you're going to broil them. There is times that's fine. I would say this. When you have high cooked vegetables, don't count them as the vegetable. So if you have a soup that you cooked the vegetable into it, that's going to leach a lot of the nutrients out. You're still going to have some, to be sure, but I would not count that as one of your vegetable intakes for the day. Okay, so if you had 3 raw vegetables in soup, you would just say, okay, I had 3 vegetables, and that's what your trainer's going to count. I hope that makes sense. Use natural oils such as coconut, avocado, etc. when cooking. Okay, remember, these natural oils are excellent forms of nutrition. Coconut, I've heard clients say, oh, but coconut oil is so high in fat. Avocado oil, these are good fat. It might interest you to know that every cell membrane in your body is at least 50% saturated fatty acids. You heard me right. You might also be interested to know that all of your sex hormones, such as testosterone, or even stress hormones such as cortisol, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, all of these hormones, guess what the precursor is? Cholesterol, which comes from saturated fats. Now, you're not going to get it from coconut oil. You could get it from coconut oil. That'd be a great source. Not going to get it from polyunsaturated like avocado. But the point here is that when you're cooking, use natural oils that give you the nutrition that serve these precursors and help balance your hormones. Can't tell you how many people get on these low-fat diets and their gallbladder goes wacky, their hormones go wacky, and then they throw their arms up in the air and say, oh, I was just following the food guide pyramid. And that's exactly the problem. Okay, let's talk about easing in. With fiber, see my little friend broccoli there, when you have fiber, you're not going to be able to tolerate huge amounts at first. And here's the reason. Your GI tract is likely atrophied, meaning it's lost its muscle tone from eating sugary and processed food that has no fiber, right? So no fiber equals no work for your GI. So what if I don't work my muscles? If I don't work my chest or my biceps, what's going to happen to them? Well, they're going to atrophy. The same thing happens with your GI system. You don't work it, you lose your muscle tone. Now, this is a problem. Let me tell you a little story. Once upon a time, over the last 15 years of my career, I have had clients start to track their food. And they track it, and this is before I start to nutritionally coach them. This is when I'm getting their workout program already, and we haven't really launched into the nutrition. And typically, these clients will eat anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 calories of food. Okay? This is the first time they've become aware of it. Now, most of their diet is consisting of processed foods, high sugar foods, that has no fiber. When it has no fiber, the intestinal tract atrophies. It doesn't work efficiently. And it's never distended. Okay? Fiber distends or stretches your stomach and intestinal tract, the entire small and large intestine. Okay? Now this is important, and here's why. Many of you, when you start to eat higher calories, a lot of the time when people come into Lifelong Fitness, our trainers will typically prescribe a higher caloric range, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, I can't eat 1,800 calories, 2,200 calories. And they're beside themselves. But here's the deal. They go and they eat the food, and they start to get fiber in their diet. They come back, and they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. I feel like I'm eating a horse. Oh. And really, in reality, what happens is they've crammed a bunch of fiber in an atrophied intestinal tract, and they psychologically think they're being gluttons because their intestinal tract actually has a sense of distension. They feel full, and it's actually bulging because they're not used to having any bulk in the intestinal tract, which was how God designed it in the first place. See what I'm saying? Now the entire intestinal tract starts to distend and it freaks them out. Oh, I'm going to get fat. I feel full. But here's the catch to the whole story. These same clients are eating literally about half the calories. The same person that was eating 3,000 calories is barely getting 1,200 calories in, and they think that they're eating more. They think they're going to get fat. And in reality, it's a fiber issue. It's a nutrition issue. It's a real food versus a non-food, which is processed food issue. I hope you get my point on this. This is very serious. And so what you have to do is add about 5 grams to your diet each and every week. So if you're at about 10 grams of fiber, the next week just add 5 grams, okay? Now, listen to your bodily signs, i.e. if it gives you gas, if you have to open every window in your house and you're offending everybody around you, that is your body talking to you. Just scale down on the fiber, okay? Scale down. So if you were at 10 and 15 gave you gas, scale down to 13. So this shows you that you're going to have to be highly aware of what you're eating. You're going to have to be tracking. You're going to have to be very conscious. So gas, bloating, all of that. This is simple signs that your body's saying, hey, scale back. I'm a little bit overactivated down here in the old GI system. Okay, pretty simple stuff. So, but make sure you stick with it. Don't give up. Don't go, oh man, I'm just dying. I'm going to get fat, blah, blah. And you're not going to do anything of the sort. Trust me. Now, let's look at the 2 forms of fiber. And I don't want to labor this too much. It's kind of boring stuff, but enough to at least give you a general understanding of what insoluble fiber is. So insoluble fiber is indigestible, which means you don't break it down, right? You don't break this down and assimilate it into your cells. So in other words, when I say you are what you eat, that is not true of insoluble fiber because you pass it out of your backside. That is the function. It literally is, it has a function that contributes to fecal bulk, right, and regularity. This is what helps regulate fecal bulk through the intestine, small and large, through a rhythmic pattern called peristalsis. Now, this is, again, what the colon does. If you imagine fecal bulk in your intestinal tract, what happens is your intestinal tract acts like a muscle. It starts to turn and churn and work the fecal bulk from literally from the time it gets into your stomach out through the anus. Okay, so this is an extremely important function that most Americans don't have. A lot of people have indigestion and they get digestive problems. This is one of the major antidotes to that. Now, it also cleanses your colon and has been shown to be anti-carcinogenic. So it literally sweeps out toxins, sweeps out these cancer-causing agents. This is a very good thing that processed foods could only dream of doing. It lowers blood sugar and prevents excessive cholesterol in the blood. Now, I talked about how it lowers blood sugar via our saran wrap analogy. It also helps to prevent excessive cholesterol because it binds it and it helps eliminate it through the anal tract. Now, let's look at some of the sources. Whole grains, the bran portion, which I talked about, and that's one of the 3. The rough portion of many veggies and fruits that can be tough to chew. This is the indigestible, insoluble fiber that we speak of. So veggie and fruit skins, the bran of the whole grain. So here's some examples. Broccoli, asparagus, a variety of vegetables. I mean, just about any vegetable you can think of is going to have at least some element of insoluble fiber. And keep in mind that most foods have a blend of both types of fiber, both the insoluble and soluble. So let's look at soluble. Soluble is different in that it does become part of you. It absorbs in the water and turns into a gel-like substance in the GI tract. You can absorb this into the cells. You can absorb this into the bloodstream. This is what slows digestion and allows nutrients to be adequately absorbed. Okay, this is extremely important. It just gels it up. It places it in a nice, almost mucousy water medium that is amenable for nutrient absorption. Now, here's what I call the 50-50 rule. You want to get a good balance between soluble and insoluble fibers. 50% should come from soluble, 50% should come from insoluble. Now, before you freak out and go, well, how am I going to? Well, just know this. If you're eating natural and you're eating those, answering those two questions, is it natural and what's the glycemic index? You are likely going to get good natural forms of fiber from both sources. So don't freak out about it. Let's look at the sources here. Many fruits, smaller portions and vegetables, oatmeal, berries, nuts, apples, beans, and here's a helpful web resource. Okay, you can just copy and paste that bad boy. It will help break down, if you're interested, the different sources of fiber and some good sources for them. So, let's look at fruit intake and weight loss. So fruit is high in nutrients, to be sure, but it's also a little bit higher in natural sugar. So if you are trying to lose weight, it is wise to limit consumption of fruit to about 2 pieces of whole fruit per day. Again, I'm not trying to demonize fruit. Fruit is wonderful, God-given, nectar of the gods food. There is no question about that. But the reason that I'd say this is because fructose, the main sugar component, is more easily converted to fat in the liver. I'm not saying don't have it, don't misunderstand. I'm just saying limit it if weight loss is your goal. Now, eventually you can gradually consume more once weight loss goals are achieved and you're satisfied, okay? Probably bump it up to about 3 servings a day, maybe even 4 in the summertime when it's seasonally appropriate. In general, do not consume more than 3 per day, as with the exception of what I just mentioned in summertime. Okay, it's time to take action, my friends. So here we go. Here's your homework assignment. I want you to plan for and consume at least 3 vegetables per day. The only exception to this rule is if your intestinal tract is so atrophied that you feel too full or it gives you, gas or bloating, then obviously you probably scale down to 2, but ultimately you want to have at least 3 veggies per day. You want to consume 2 to 3 servings of fruit per day, depending on your trainer recommendations. Have veggies pre-prepared the night before so that you can pack them or have them ready the following day. Before I go on here, the first homework assignment there, plan for and consume at least 3 veggies. Remember, at least is a very key phrase there. Remember, 5 to 6 is more appropriate. Eventually, we're just talking, if you're not used to having vegetables, average American only has about 1 serving a day. We need to bump that up. Okay, so that is what we are talking about. So, here we are. We're at the end, and I could not be more excited for you. This simple concept that our mother would always try to pound into us, eat your vegetables. It's amazing the amount of wisdom our mothers have, isn't it? Because it's so true. This is literally the foundation of your health. Consider this. You think of the average American having about 1.5 servings of vegetables per day. If we as Americans collectively were to consume the guidelines that I just showed you, do you know what would happen to our health? Do you know what would happen to diabetes? Do you know what would happen to obesity? Do you know what would happen to blood pressure? Hormonal issues? It's just amazing. It's amazing that nature has the answers. Now, a lot of people in our modern society would say, well, that sounds kind of weird. No, think of it. All the food, all the nutrition that we need comes from nature, not from a factory, not from a package, not from a chemical, not from refined sugar, not from refined grains, right from the earth and from the animals that live there. It's a pretty simple concept, my friends. I hope you're getting it. Thank you so very much for being here. You guys are great. Love you all. Remember to never excuse away your inner greatness because you have it in you. And always remember, life is good.